A single dad in worn clothes sat quietly in economy with his daughter. Passengers laughed at his old shoes and whispered cruel jokes. But when the plane hit trouble and the crew suddenly stood at attention calling him, "Sir," every mocking passenger realized they had judged the wrong man. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun struggled through gray clouds as travelers rushed through Denver International Airport. It was Thursday, September 28th, and Gate 17 was packed with people waiting to board Flight 445 to San Diego. In the corner sat a man who looked out of place. His name was James Cooper, 36 years old, wearing faded jeans with a tear at the knee and an old navy hoodie. His sneakers were worn down, with frayed laces and a small hole near the toe. Next to him sat his daughter, Sophie. She was 7 years old with bright green eyes and blonde hair in a ponytail. She wore a pink jacket that was too big and clutched a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunk. The elephant's gray fabric was faded, and one ear had been sewn back on with mismatched thread. Sophie leaned against her father's shoulder, sleepy from their early wake-up. James wrapped his arm around her and kissed her head. "How much longer, Daddy?" Sophie asked, yawning. "Just a little bit, sweetheart. Then we will be on the plane," James said softly. "And then we will see the beach?" Her eyes lit up. "The biggest, most beautiful beach you have ever seen," James promised. This trip had taken James 8 months to save for. He worked at a warehouse during the day and stocked shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. His wife, Sophie's mother Rebecca, had passed away 2 years ago from cancer. Since then, it had been just the two of them. Across from them sat a woman in her 50s wearing a cream designer suit. Her hair was perfectly styled, and expensive jewelry glittered on her wrists and neck. She was talking loudly on her phone about a business deal. When she glanced at James and Sophie, she wrinkled her nose. She leaned toward the man next to her, who wore an expensive watch. "I hope they are not sitting near us," she said loud enough for others to hear. "Economy is bad enough without people who look like they cannot even afford the ticket." The man chuckled. "Probably spent his last paycheck. Look at those shoes." A younger woman nearby in designer workout clothes smiled meanly. "At least the kid is quiet. For now." James heard every word. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. These people did not know that he had worked double shifts for months to afford this trip. They did not know he had skipped meals to make sure Sophie always had enough. They just saw what they wanted to see. Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, why is that lady looking at us funny?" James smiled. "Some people just have funny faces, sweetheart. Do not worry about it." Sophie giggled, and James relaxed a little. The gate agent announced boarding. "We will now begin boarding Flight 445 to San Diego. First-class passengers, please come forward." The woman in the designer suit stood immediately, grabbing her expensive bag. As she walked past James and Sophie, she pulled her bag closer, as if afraid they might touch it. The man with the watch followed, and they disappeared down the jet bridge. A few minutes later, economy was called. James stood and took Sophie's hand. "Ready, princess." "Ready," Sophie said excitedly. They joined the line. As they walked through first class, James noticed the woman already settled with champagne. She saw them and turned to her companion. "I told you," she said loudly. "Economy is going to be unbearable today." James kept walking. He helped Sophie into her window seat, then squeezed into the middle seat next to her. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him. A young man in his 20s with expensive headphones sat in the aisle seat. He looked at James's clothes and sighed dramatically. He pulled out his phone and put in his earbuds, making it clear he wanted no conversation. "Excuse me," an elderly man said, trying to reach his seat. James stood to let him pass. "Thank you, son," the old man said kindly. "That is a beautiful little girl you have." Thank you, sir, James said, grateful for the kindness. The flight attendants moved through the cabin checking seatbelts. One of them, a woman with red hair in a bun named Rachel, walked past without really looking at James. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Good morning, folks. This is Captain Anderson. We will be departing for San Diego shortly. Flight time is about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Sit back and enjoy the flight. The plane began moving. Sophie pressed her face to the window. We are moving, Daddy. The plane picked up speed and lifted off. Sophie gasped. We are flying. Daddy, we are really flying. James leaned over to look with her. The ground fell away, and the city became smaller. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But 20 minutes into the flight, the plane suddenly jolted. Sophie's juice box tipped over. Oh no! Sophie said. The plane shook again, harder. Overhead bins rattled. Daddy? Sophie's voice was scared. It is okay, sweetie. Just bumpy air, James said calmly. The seatbelt sign dinged back on. The captain's voice returned with tension. Folks, we have run into unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, be seated. The plane dropped suddenly. Several passengers screamed. A woman across the aisle clutched her armrest, knuckles white. A man started praying loudly. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Daddy, I am scared. James unbuckled long enough to pull Sophie onto his lap, then buckled them both together. Listen to me, princess. This is normal. Planes go through bumpy air all the time. The pilots know what to do. We are safe. Are you sure? Sophie whispered. I am absolutely sure, James said firmly. The young man in the aisle seat had gone pale. His phone fell to the floor. This does not feel normal, he said shakily. It is, James said calmly. The plane is built for this. Trust the pilots. The plane shook violently, and the lights flickered. The panic was spreading. Rachel was making her way to her jump seat when she passed James's row. She glanced at him, then stopped. She looked more closely, and her eyes widened. She leaned down. Sir, excuse me. Are you James Cooper? James looked up, surprised. Yes. Rachel's posture changed completely. She stood straighter. Sir, I did not recognize you in civilian clothes. My apologies, Commander. The young man looked confused. Wait, what? Commander? Rachel pulled out her radio. This is Rachel in the main cabin. We have a Priority 1 passenger in 32E. Repeat, Priority 1 in 32E. A voice crackled through. Confirm passenger identity. It is Commander Cooper, sir, Rachel said respectfully. The word, Commander, echoed through nearby rows. Several passengers turned to look. Sophie looked up confused. Daddy, why did she call you Commander? James sighed. It is just an old job title, sweetheart. Nothing important. Rachel spoke again. Sir, Captain Anderson requests your presence in the cockpit. We have a situation. James's expression changed instantly. His tired face became focused and alert. What kind of situation? The instrument panel is showing conflicting readings. The altitude indicators are not matching. Captain Anderson saw your name on the manifest and hoped you were on board. The young man whispered, Who is this guy? James looked at Sophie. Princess, I need to go help the pilots for a few minutes. Can you be brave? Sophie's lip trembled, but she nodded. Okay, Daddy. That is my girl. James handed her Mr. Trunk. Hold on to him. He will keep you safe. James stood. Another flight attendant appeared, an older man with gray hair. When he saw James, he straightened. "Commander Cooper," the man said respectfully. "Sir, it is an honor. I am Michael, head flight attendant." James nodded. "Michael. You know each other?" the young man asked, bewildered. Michael looked at him seriously. "Commander Cooper is one of the most decorated pilots in Navy history. He flew rescue missions in some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Saved hundreds of lives." A hush fell over nearby rows. The woman in the designer suit turned around from first class, her face pale with fear. James moved through the plane with purpose. His worn sneakers made no sound, but his entire demeanor had changed. He walked with command and confidence. The cockpit door opened. Captain Anderson turned, relief flooding his face. "James Cooper," the captain said. "Thank God you are on this plane." "What is happening?" James asked, stepping inside. The captain gestured to the instrument panel. "About 10 minutes ago, our altimeter started giving different readings. Primary says 35,000 feet. Backup says 33,000. GPS says something else. With this turbulence, I cannot trust visual estimates." James leaned over the instruments, his eyes scanning quickly. "Have you tried resetting the air data computer?" "Yes, sir." "No change," the co-pilot said, looking stressed. James studied the panel. "This is a pressure sensor calibration error. Happens with rapid altitude changes in turbulence. You need to switch to alternate static source and manually recalibrate." "Can you do it?" Captain Anderson asked. "Yes." James reached under the panel and flipped switches. "Switching to alternate static source now. Watch your readings." The numbers flickered, then stabilized. All three displays now showed 34,800 feet. "Altitude confirmed," the co-pilot said with relief. "All systems matching." Captain Anderson breathed out. "Commander, I cannot thank you enough. Having you here made all the difference." James shook his head. "You would have figured it out. But I am glad I could help." "How long since you flew?" the captain asked. "For years," James said quietly. "I left the Navy after my wife got sick. I needed to be with my daughter." Captain Anderson put a hand on James's shoulder. "Your country owes you a debt. Thank you for your service." James nodded and left the cockpit. As he stepped into first class, every person stared. The woman in the designer suit had tears running down her face, her makeup smudged. James walked back through the plane. When he reached economy, people stood to let him pass, even though the seatbelt sign was on. The young man quickly stood. "Sir, please, take my seat. Take the aisle." James shook his head gently. "I am fine where I am. But thank you." He slid back into the middle seat. Sophie immediately hugged him. "Daddy! You are back." "I told you I would be," James said, holding her tight. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank a very special passenger today. Commander James Cooper, retired United States Navy pilot, just assisted us with a technical issue. His expertise ensured your safety. Commander Cooper flew rescue missions for 12 years, saving countless lives. On behalf of everyone, thank you, Commander. Thank you for your service." The cabin erupted in applause. People clapped and cheered. The elderly man patted James's shoulder. The young man had tears in his eyes. "Sir, I am so sorry," the young man said. "I judged you the moment I sat down. I thought I was better than you. I was so wrong." James looked at him kindly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." "I will," the young man promised. "I will never judge someone like that again." The turbulence had stopped. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The woman in the designer suit walked back from first class. Her heels clicked as she approached. Her face was red with shame. "Commander Cooper," she said, her voice breaking. "I owe you an apology. I said horrible things about you. I judged you on your clothes. You saved everyone on this plane. I am so ashamed. I am so sorry." James looked at her gently but firmly. "You do not owe me an apology. But maybe ask yourself why you felt the need to judge someone you did not know. Think about other people you have treated that way." The woman nodded, tears streaming. "I will. I promise I will." She walked back to her seat crying. Sophie tugged James's sleeve. "Daddy, are you a hero?" James smiled and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. I am just your dad. That is the most important job I will ever have." "But you saved everyone," Sophie said. "I helped," James corrected. "But you know what? The real heroic thing is being kind. Being patient. Being loving. You do not need to save lives to be a hero. You just need to treat people with kindness." For the rest of the flight, passengers thanked James. A businessman shook his hand. A mother thanked him for keeping her children safe. The elderly man told James he had served in the army and understood sacrifice. The young man asked about James's Navy service. James answered simply, never bragging, just telling stories about his crew and the missions. "The thing about the military," James said, "is you learn it is not about you. It is about the people next to you. It is about doing your job so everyone gets home safe." "That is incredible," the young man said. "I work in finance. I make a lot of money. I thought that made me important. But you saved lives. Real lives." James shook his head. "Everyone's work matters. You just have to ask yourself why you are doing it. Are you doing it just to make money? Or to help people? Those are the questions that matter." When the plane landed, passengers applauded again. But this time it was gratitude. As passengers gathered their belongings, no one pushed forward. They stood back, creating a clear path. "Commander Cooper should exit first," someone said. Rachel and Michael stood at the front. As James approached with Sophie, they stood at attention. "Commander Cooper," Rachel said formally. "It has been an honor having you on board." James nodded respectfully. "The honor was mine. You have a good crew." James and Sophie walked into the terminal. Sophie looked up at him with shining eyes. "Daddy, everyone was so nice at the end." "They were," James agreed. "Why were they mean at the beginning?" Sophie asked innocently. James knelt so he was at her level. "Because they did not know me yet. Sometimes people judge others on what they see outside. But what really matters is what is inside. Your heart, your kindness, how you treat people. That is what counts." "Like Mr. Trunk," Sophie said, holding up her elephant. "He looks old and worn, but he is the best toy ever because of all the love inside him." James smiled, his eyes misty. "Exactly like Mr. Trunk. You are so smart." They walked through the airport. Behind them, passengers from the flight watched, their expressions changed and thoughtful. Outside, the California sun was warm. James could smell the ocean in the air. "Come on, princess," he said, taking Sophie's hand. "We have a beach to explore and a sandcastle to build. The biggest one ever." Sophie said, skipping beside him. They reached the rental car area. The agent, a young woman named Maria, smiled kindly when she saw them. "First time in San Diego?" she asked. "Yes," James said. "Taking my daughter to see the ocean for the first time." Maria's smile widened. "She is going to love it. The beach is beautiful. She upgraded their car for free. For the little one, she winked. When they reached the beach and Sophie saw the vast Pacific Ocean, her mouth fell open. "Daddy," she breathed. "It is so big." "It is pretty amazing," James said. They spent the afternoon building sandcastles, decorating with shells, jumping in waves. James watched his daughter play, her laughter carried by the wind. This was why he worked 2 jobs. For moments exactly like this. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, they sat together wrapped in a towel. "Daddy, this was the best day ever," Sophie said. "It was pretty special," James agreed. "Thank you for bringing me here." "Thank you for being my daughter," James said, kissing her head. They sat watching the waves, the sun sinking toward the horizon. Everyone had their own story, James thought. You could not judge a person by their appearance. That was what those passengers had learned. "Daddy?" Sophie said sleepily. "Yes, princess. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to help people. I want to be brave. I want to be kind." James felt his throat tighten. "You already are all those things, Sophie. You already are." That night in their small hotel room, Sophie fell asleep immediately, Mr. Trunk under her arm. James sat by the window, looking at the city lights. He thought about the passengers who had judged him. He hoped they had learned something. He hoped they would treat the next person with more kindness. He thought about Rachel and Michael and Captain Anderson. Good people doing their jobs. He thought about Sophie's words. "You are my hero." He realized the most heroic thing was being a father. Being there. Being present. Being loving. Titles did not matter. What mattered was that little girl sleeping behind him. What mattered was keeping his promise to Rebecca. What mattered was love. James pulled out his phone and looked at Rebecca's photo. "I wish you could have been here today," he whispered. She was so happy. The next days they spent at the beach. Building castles, collecting shells, jumping in waves, watching sunsets. On their last day, Sophie was quiet. "What is wrong, princess?" James asked. "I do not want to leave," Sophie said sadly. "I know," James said. "But we will come back. I promise. And maybe we will go somewhere else too. There is a whole world to explore." Sophie smiled, reassured. The flight home was completely different from their journey to San Diego. As James and Sophie walked down the aisle to their seats, passengers actually smiled at them. Some nodded respectfully. A few even said hello. The flight attendant working their section, a kind woman named Jennifer, recognized Sophie from the outbound flight. "Welcome back, sweetheart," she said warmly. "Did you have fun at the beach?" Sophie's face lit up. "Yes. We built the biggest sandcastle ever. And I found 17 shells. And we saw dolphins." "That sounds amazing," Jennifer said, genuinely interested. She looked at James with respect. "Sir, it is an honor to have you flying with us again." James felt slightly embarrassed by the attention but nodded politely. "Thank you." Throughout the flight, Jennifer brought Sophie extra snacks, juice boxes, and even a small stuffed airplane toy. "This is for being such a brave traveler," she told Sophie. A businessman in an expensive suit, who was sitting across the aisle, leaned over. "Excuse me, sir. I heard about what happened on your flight here. What you did in the cockpit. That was remarkable. My name is Robert Chen." He extended his hand. James shook it. "James Cooper. Nice to meet you." "I work in aviation safety," Robert said. "What you did, solving that altimeter problem so quickly, that takes real expertise. Most pilots would not have diagnosed it that fast." "I had good training," James said modestly. "More than that," Robert insisted. You had experience. The kind you only get from real situations. From what I understand, you flew rescue missions. James nodded. For 12 years, yes. Robert's expression grew more respectful. That is incredible. Those are some of the most dangerous missions in aviation. High stress, low visibility, often in terrible weather. The pilots who do that work are the best of the best. Sophie was listening, learning things about her father she had never heard before. She tugged on his sleeve. Daddy flew in bad weather? Sometimes, James said softly. When people needed help. Your father saved a lot of lives, Robert told Sophie. He is a real hero. Sophie beamed with pride. I know. He is my hero too. Robert smiled at her, then looked back at James. If you ever need anything, here is my card. I mean it. Job opportunities, references, anything. Someone with your skills and experience should be recognized. James took the card, surprised. Thank you. I appreciate that. After Robert returned to his seat, Sophie whispered, Daddy, why did you stop flying planes? James looked at his daughter, his expression soft. Because you needed me more than the Navy did. Your mom was sick, and I needed to be home with both of you. After she passed away, you needed me even more. Some things are more important than jobs, sweetheart. You are the most important thing in my life. Sophie hugged him tightly. I am glad you are with me. Me too, princess. Me too. An older couple sitting in front of them turned around. The woman had kind eyes and gray hair. I hope you do not mind me saying, but I overheard your conversation. You are raising your daughter right. In this world, people forget what really matters. Family. Love. Being there for each other. You clearly understand that. Her husband nodded in agreement. We raised 4 children. They are all grown now with families of their own. And you know what they remember most? Not the expensive vacations or fancy toys. They remember the time we spent together. The simple moments. You are giving your daughter something precious. James felt emotion tighten his throat. Thank you. That means a lot. The woman smiled. She is lucky to have you. As the plane began its descent into Denver, Sophie pressed her face to the window one last time, watching the city come into view. Goodbye, California, she whispered. Thank you for the ocean. When they landed and collected their bags from baggage claim, a young couple approached them. The woman was holding a baby. Excuse me, the woman said nervously. Are you Commander Cooper? From the San Diego flight a few days ago? James looked surprised. Yes, but how did you? My sister was on that flight, the woman explained. She told me what happened. What you did. She said you saved everyone. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She also told me what you said to the passengers afterward. About not judging people. About treating everyone with kindness. Her husband spoke up. That message really affected her. She called us in tears, apologizing for things she had said and done. She has been different since that flight. Better. More thoughtful. We just wanted to say thank you, the woman continued. Not just for the technical help you gave, but for the lesson you taught. Our baby girl here, we want to raise her to see people the way you described. To look beyond the surface. To treat everyone with dignity. James was deeply moved. I am glad it made a difference. That is all any of us can hope for. The couple thanked him again and walked away. Sophie looked up at her father with wonder. Daddy, you changed people's hearts. James knelt down to Sophie's level. No, sweetheart. I just reminded them of something they already knew. Something everyone knows deep down. That we are all human. We all have struggles. We all deserve respect. When they arrived back in Denver, reality was indeed waiting. James had worked the next morning at 6. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter. Laundry needed to be done. The house felt empty without Rebecca's presence, as it always did. But something fundamental had changed inside James. That trip had reminded him why he kept going. Why he worked those exhausting hours. Why he sacrificed his own comfort. That night, after Sophie was asleep with Mr. Trunk and her jar of sand, James sat at the kitchen table. He looked at Robert Chen's business card. Then he opened his laptop and, for the first time in years, updated his resume. Not because he did not value his warehouse job. Not because he was ashamed of stocking grocery shelves. But because maybe, just maybe, he could do both. Be there for Sophie and use his skills to help others. He applied for a part-time position as a flight instructor. Something he could do on weekends, teaching the next generation of pilots. The pay would help. But more than that, it would let him do what he loved again, even if just a little bit. Life continued. But it continued with hope. But something had changed. James carried the memory like a treasure. Sophie's laughter. Her joy. Her eyes when she saw the ocean. That was worth more than gold. What James did not know was how far the ripples of that day had spread. The woman in the designer suit, Patricia Morrison, had indeed started volunteering at a homeless shelter every Saturday morning. She served meals, listened to stories, and learned names. She saw people, really saw them, for the first time in years. The young man from the aisle seat, David, had quit his high-paying finance job. He now worked at a non-profit organization that provided financial literacy training to low-income families. The pay was less, but every night he went home feeling like he had made a real difference. The teenage boys who had filmed James had started an anti-bullying campaign at their high school. They gave presentations about judging people by character, not appearance. They shared their own story of shame and learning. Even Captain Anderson had been changed. He started a program at his airline to recognize passengers who showed extraordinary character, not just those with money or status. He called it the Cooper Courtesy Award. Rachel, the flight attendant, had written that letter to the Navy recommending James for recognition. Months later, James would receive an unexpected call informing him that he was being honored at a veterans ceremony. He would be embarrassed by the attention but would attend because Sophie insisted. The elderly couple from the flight, Henry and Martha, had started volunteering as foster grandparents. They spent time with children whose own grandparents were absent. They read stories, taught cooking, and gave hugs. They told everyone it was inspired by watching James with Sophie. Robert Chen, the aviation safety expert from the return flight, had actually done more than just give James his card. He had recommended James to Linda Martinez personally, making a phone call to vouch for his character and skills. That recommendation had been the reason James got the interview so quickly. All of these changes, all of these ripples spreading outward from one moment of crisis and revelation on a plane, were happening. Lives were being touched. People were being helped. Kindness was spreading. And James, working at his warehouse, teaching on weekends, raising his daughter with love and patience, had no idea of the scope of what he had started. He would have been shocked to know. He would have insisted he had done nothing special. But that was exactly what made it special. James had not been trying to change the world. He had not been seeking recognition or praise. He had simply been himself, competent, calm, kind, and focused on what mattered most. And sometimes, that is all it takes to change everything. Sophie kept Mr. Trunk on her bed with a jar of sand from the beach. On nights when she missed her mother, she would hold that jar and remember the ocean. Remember her father's love. Remember that she was brave. One evening, about 2 months after their trip, Sophie came home from school with a special assignment. "Daddy, we have to write about our hero," she said excitedly. "Can you help me?" "Of course," James said. "Who is your hero?" Sophie looked at him like the answer was obvious. You, Daddy. You are my hero. James felt his chest tighten. Princess, you do not have to write about me. You can write about someone famous. An astronaut, a scientist, someone important. Sophie shook her head firmly. But you are important. You are the most important person in the whole world. You work so hard for us. You make me breakfast every day. You help me with homework even when you are tired. You took me to see the ocean. You saved everyone on the airplane. You teach people to fly now. And most important, you love me no matter what. James had to wipe his eyes. Okay, Princess. Let us write about heroes. They sat together at the kitchen table, and Sophie wrote in her careful handwriting, My hero is my daddy. He is strong and brave and kind. He was in the Navy and saved many people. But the best thing about him is that he loves me and takes care of me every single day. Being a good daddy is the most heroic thing anyone can be. When Sophie read her essay to the class the next week, her teacher cried. So did several other students. The essay was so honest, so pure, that it reminded everyone what truly mattered in life. Mrs. Williams made a copy and gave it to James during pickup. This is beautiful, she said. You should frame this. Sophie loves you very much, and she understands something many adults never learn. That everyday heroism, the kind that shows up consistently with love and patience, is the most important kind. James did frame it. He hung it on the wall in their small living room, right next to a photo of Rebecca. Every time he looked at it, especially on hard days when he was exhausted and doubting himself, he remembered why he did everything he did. For love. For Sophie. For family. Those were the only reasons that mattered. Years later, when Sophie was grown, she would tell her own children about that trip. She would say her father was the best man she knew. Not because of titles or medals. But because he loved her. Because he showed up. Because he taught her what mattered. And she would keep Mr. Trunk in that jar of sand. Reminders of a perfect trip and a father who was her hero every day. Because that is what true heroism looks like. It looks like worn shoes and old hoodies. It looks like working 2 jobs. It looks like patience and kindness and love. It looks like James Cooper, a single dad who wanted to show his daughter the ocean. And in doing so, showed a plane full of strangers what really matters in life.